Okay, this is Bret Hayworth with the Sioux City Journal, welcoming Congressman Steve King into our offices here. This is one in the series of web videos that we'll be doing with all the Republicans who are running for the 4th District, Iowa 4th Congressional District race. And we're approaching the Election Day, which is on Tuesday, June 2nd. So thank you for coming in, Congressman King.
Thanks for having me in, Bret.
The coronavirus spread has really been an impact on the campaign. Some of the restrictions that have been in place in Iowa are starting to be lifted off. To my understanding, campaign hasn't been happening in person for several weeks. With the restrictions coming up, do you see in these last few days, would you see that in-person campaigning could happen here, just right in the last days to the election?
Well, with the social distancing that we are directed to have anyway, to pull a bunch of people together, do a campaign rally, I don't think that's going to sell very well. We've looked at doing some venues outside where we could spread people out and maintain the social distancing. We just don't know if we can get people to come to those events because they've got extreme caution. So I think we'll continue to do the media side of this thing and the outreach that we have, conference calls and those kind of things. But from the standpoint of this, that people know me. When one of the polls, my name ID is the same as Donald Trump's. He gets a lot more press than I do, but I guess I've been here a little longer. And so we think that part's all right, and people know what I stand for and what I believe in. And I hope they remember the kind of work that I had the blessing to do for them, talk to each other, and go to the polls and make a decision. If you're going to change horses in the middle of the stream, you'd better know the horse you're going to switch over to.
Okay, thank you. There have not been any widely televised debates, but there have been some smaller debates. Mm-hmm. How do you feel like you did in Mason City yesterday?
Well,
I know you did that remotely by Zoom, but yeah. How do you feel you did?
That one, the format of that was 1-minute answer, 30-minute rebuttal if it needed one. And it's just really quick to try to contain a thought in 60 seconds. I'm a little more complex than that, I think. But I didn't think there was a lot of anything decided. Everybody tried to say I am a conservative, but the difference is I've actually performed on all those things they say that they're going to do. So I should come out of that one all right. I didn't think there were any fireworks to speak of in that discussion in Mason City, but perhaps the television one will show some of those things.
Mm-hmm. And then the previous debate was in Spencer a couple of weeks ago, and at the end you brought up an agreement that you have with Leader McCarthy on getting your committees back. Did you express yourself the way you wanted to that night, or is there any way what is the agreement and how definitive is it that you can get these committees back?
I expressed myself precisely at the debate in Spencer, and what I said was exactly reflected the conversation with Kevin McCarthy. But when Kevin McCarthy said that he didn't say exonerated, I never said he said exonerated. I was speaking of that in the context of General Flynn, who I believe is being exonerated, and I said my time for exoneration will be when I'm restored to my committees. But this is only a New York Times misquote, and nobody in this district really believes that New York Times misquote. But the agreement that we had, and I brought the transcript of that conversation. You need to have real good records on everything you say and do, and so the transcript of that conversation is this way. I said this to Kevin McCarthy: this is my understanding, and so that we understand each other, I'll ask you this way, quote, will you go to the steering committee and advocate on my behalf to restore me to all of my committees? And McCarthy's answer was directly yes. And so I accurately characterized that. I've since spoken to 11 of the 30 members of the steering committee, and there are others that have made some phone calls on my behalf. There were only 3 people that were opposed, and the press found them from the beginning. Otherwise, I haven't found anybody that opposes putting me back on my committees. They understand the injustice of it. They say it never should have happened, but we're just kind of stuck in this place where Kevin McCarthy needs to call a steering committee meeting. There's a chance that happens when this is being aired.
Okay, so yet in late May, perhaps, is that what you're saying? Okay,
mm-hmm.
Okay. And of the 30 that you said, just to cover that ground, of the 30 that would be on that committee, only 3 have spoken publicly against it. So you feel
That's correct.
So you feel like it will happen, that you will be returned.
If Kevin McCarthy advocates for me, as he said, he has 4 votes. Steve Scalise, the whip, controls 3 votes, and he's likely to team up, of course, with McCarthy. He's had no pushback at all. I had a conversation earlier today regarding that. So there's 7 votes there. You count the rest of them that we either have, the whip team has brought back to me or they've spoken to me directly. I think there are 26 votes there to support putting me back on my committees. Some of the others are unknown. I only know of 3 that are no. There are 35 votes altogether, so we could actually be 32-3 in the end. That's pretty overwhelming. And they know that this has never happened to anybody under circumstances like this in the history of Congress. There have been 4 members of Congress removed from their committees in all of history. 3 of them are convicted federal felons. They can't even find a rule that they think I thought about circumventing, let alone violate. And so this precedent cannot be allowed to stand. It can't be allowed to stand to the end of this Congress, because if that's the case, it is a precedent that will be used against somebody else and somebody else. And this is what they've done. It to a degree disenfranchises the 4th District. If it was going to happen in a Congress, this was the one for it to happen, because Nancy Pelosi is the Speaker, and nothing's coming through a committee unless she approves that.
Let me go there. That was one of the questions I was going to ask a little bit later on, but since you're in that, Randy Feenstra, who's one of the Republicans who's running against you, is his tagline on a lot of his campaign ads is that he can deliver, and he said that with you not having the committees, that you're not in a position to deliver for Iowans. So how do you respond to that?
He can't name any Republican that has delivered through a committee in this entire Congress, because it's a Congress run by Nancy Pelosi. And it's really clear that I have delivered over and over again. That's why the people on the left side of the Republican Party have lined up against me. Why the Republicans in name only, the establishments, the elitists, the never-Trumpers, those are the folks that are behind Randy Feenstra. And you are the company you keep. But that's so. You could go down through this list of those. You've got the Amnesty PAC that's there. That's the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. They've given me the Spirit of Enterprise Award every year, but we've always fought because they want amnesty and I don't. And you've got the Rhino PAC. That is the Republican Main Street PAC. There's not a single conservative that's associated with that. They killed my repeal of Obamacare, and they're promoting red flag gun laws. Then you've got the Never Trumper PAC. That's mostly reflected by the Republican Jewish Coalition. And if you look at the people behind there who writes the check, you'll know that to be true. Then you have the Kill the Heartbeat Bill PAC. That's the National Right to Life. They blocked the heartbeat bill in the House of Representatives when I had 174 co-sponsors. And I called them out on it. And I went to the floor with posters and told the world they're standing in the way. And our leadership gave them a veto power to do that. They're resentful about me outing them as a non-pro-life organization posing as a pro-life organization. Then you've got the Gambling PAC, and that's, of course, Christopher Rance's Gambling PAC, and Randy Feenstra. If he delivers, he delivered the largest expansion of gambling in the history of the state of Iowa.
So let me just go back on those answers of the several PACs. That's not the proper name of the PACs, but that's just the generic of what their focus is. Is that correct? Just to make sure I understand that. Okay.
Yeah, I can give you a chapter and verse on them, though, if you really want it, Brett. I don't need to go into that, but they are fairly characterized that way. Everybody in Washington sees the Main Street Republicans as the Rhino PAC. That's, if I say that, they know. And the Amnesty PAC, the U.S. Chamber of Amnesty, they know that. More people really need to know what's important is the National Right to Life blocked the heartbeat bill. They are no longer a pro-life organization. They are incrementalists. I went for an hour and 45-minute debate with Jim Bopp, their attorney, and by the time we came through the other side of that, it was clear to me they would never make a move that would put an end to Roe versus Wade.
Okay, thank you. Are you concerned by any of the polling that you've seen, and how confident are you that you would win this primary here on June 2nd?
Well, I would say I have some concerns. I mean, there's no question the race is tightening up. They have a tendency of doing that. There's still a pretty good sized number of undecideds, and our stuff tells me that I'm ahead. I see others out there that, these polls that we're seeing aren't really polls. They're memos about polls. There's only one poll that's been released in this entire campaign, and that's the one we released last October, where I was at 59%, Randy Feenstra was at 15%. But millions of dollars in attack ads running day and night on every network and radio and mailers coming in 2 or 3 a day has to do something. But there's a solid core of support there that knows me. And they're beginning to learn who Randy Feenstra is by the company he keeps. So I think we're okay. But it's up to the voters. And I want them to come out and I want them to make their choice. But why would you change horses in the middle of the stream when you've got somebody that's never let you down on a single conservative principle and always ran to the sound of the guns?
Do you see it as essentially a two-person race based on how, from your perception of how this campaign has played out?
Well, I've kind of learned to like the other candidates in this debate, and they have a right to run too, and I don't want to diminish their efforts. I listened to the debate. We did one just last night, and when I listened to them speak, I'm sitting there, I'm kind of smiling because they're espousing conservative principles, and that adds to the cause. So I don't want to diminish that. It's a five-way race that's here, and there's some people that say, I'm not going to support King because, whatever their reasons are. Well, they've got three other candidates to choose. They don't have to vote for the person that's associated with the left wing of the Republican Party.
Thank you. You raised a couple topics there that I wanted to get into. So you talked about Feenstra's, or a lot of money being spent on ads against you. Your fundraising hasn't been overly plump this time. Do you wish you had more money? And is it a case where you have asked people who have given you donations to King for Congress in past years who have not donated to you this time? Has that happened?
Well, nobody's going to say they didn't wish they had more money. You never have enough money in this arena. I happen to be the one that's raised more money in a congressional race than any Republican in the history of the state of Iowa. So it's not that I can't raise money. But what happened in this race that's different is, this was a strategized attack on me. It was a political coup attempt. It was orchestrated, and I knew that it was orchestrated as far back as the day before Thanksgiving in 2018. I preempted it several ways, but when I sent the message to the people that were orchestrating it, that was on January 8th of 2019. The very next morning, Randy Feenstra announced his campaign on Twitter with no rollout plan, no website, nothing. And by the way, he had just deleted 10 years of his Twitter account. And so the first filing that's there, from 2009 until 2019, he wiped all of that out. What was in that account, I don't know. But the first filing in there, the first tweet was, I'm going to run against Steve King. I'm going to erase my history and run against Steve King with no rollout plan. The following Monday, he was scheduled to swear in to the General Assembly as a state senator. Wouldn't you wait till you at least gave your oath and then maybe announce your campaign the next day? But the very next day, the New York Times story came out, and that was the trigger of the launched attack that I knew was coming, that I'd gotten the heads up on the day before Thanksgiving in 2018. So they went after all my major donors. And I have one who has got a message into me as early this morning, and I haven't gotten back to him yet. He wrote a max out campaign check to me, and he has 17 calls on his recording of people attacking him verbally for supporting Steve King. There's a network out there that's chased major donors down, and it's suppressed the donations. And so I'm actually looking at this and I think, I've been doing my job all along. I haven't let anybody down. And if the money doesn't come in to win this race, then that's how it is. But I can't spend all my time trying to raise money. I've been serving the constituents of this district, especially during this COVID virus time. I haven't hardly paid any attention to campaign. We've got constituents that need service. That's what I signed up to do, and we've helped a lot of people, and it probably doesn't show very much in the press or in the public.
So just to summarize, some donors haven't given money that have in the past, and you've been focused on on congressional duties, not so much the campaign.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think my name ID and my reputation and my integrity, that floats through a lot of this. And Bret, you ought to know that in the 3 of the 4 previous times my name's been on the ballot, we didn't spend a dime on advertising. And we got into the race in 2018, we spent $139,000 on advertising in a congressional race, in a general election race that had all that money poured in behind J.D. Schulten, and still came out of there with a larger margin of victory than the governor did, or Ted Cruz in Texas for that matter. So we have been getting reelected, I'll say I guess, so I think of us as a team, getting reelected on doing good work in constituent services and serving the public in Washington and at home. That means something in Northwest Iowa.
And what you just said there, and in various times over the last few minutes that we've talked, and just to wrap up, you've kind of gotten toward this direction, but just as a summary, why should someone vote for you as congressman to come back for another term?
Well, look at my history. I mean, I'm the one that's actually done these things. I've listened to every one of my opponents pledged that they will do the things that I've already done. And the things that they know that I own would be, for example, renewable fuels. The first bill that I introduced laid the foundation for both ethanol and biodiesel, and it became law. That's something completely forgotten about by the press. That's renewable fuels. Second Amendment, I own that issue, but I have to share it with a handful of others. I'm a little more Second Amendment than the NRA. And then I'm the lead on Obamacare. I wrote the first legislation to do that. We passed the full repeal out of that. Yeah, excuse me. I needed that correction, I'm sure. Then I appreciate it. But I'm the lead on the repeal of Obamacare. I wrote the first legislation to repeal Obamacare. It has passed the House exactly as I've delivered it 4 separate times, plus about 80 different versions of it that have reduced, and now we're waiting for the Supreme Court to hopefully rip it out by the roots, which people recognize me for. So I own that issue. No one in Congress has done as much as I've done to repeal Obamacare. On the immigration issue, it isn't just build a wall, but I built one on the floor of the House to show them how easy it was as far back as 2005. I've been down to the border. I've actually built wall with my own hands several times, but the domestic application of the restoration of our immigration laws and the respect for it is something that I am the lead on in Congress. And that's the immigration issue. And on the life issue, as I mentioned, the heartbeat bill is part of it, but I've always been an active member of the pro-life caucus. And this is something that I want people to know out across here, is that when the first hire in this congressional office was Sandy Hanlon, who's in our federal building right now. She's the first hire and long-term employee. But one of the standards we set up was everybody that comes to work for Steve King in the district and in Washington will be committed, social conservative, pro-life. And that is one of the best decisions that I have made. So those are some of the reasons why people ought to vote for me. I am a known quantity. I've never let them down. And I've run to the sound of the guns on every one of those big issues. I've walked through the fire. I've come out the other side tempered, ready to take on the rest of the battle. That swamp is deep out there. We don't need to add to the swamp. We need to drain the swamp. Our construction business is in the business of actually doing that, but that's a side story. And then I'd say that just 3 very short anecdotes so people understand who I am. For example, when Barack Obama shut down our memorials, World War II memorial and the rest of the memorials, I'm there the next morning with a pair of scissors and wire cutters. Cut those wires, swing those barricades open. We let the Mississippians in, and the Story County boys came in right behind it. There wasn't a dry eye in the house. We could have been arrested for that, but I told the guard, this is beyond your pay grade, we're going, and we did. And then every morning at 9 o'clock, I would be there to open up every one of those barricades. There's only 2 people that opened up the barricades and went up into the Lincoln Memorial, and that was Michelle Bachmann and Steve King on a Saturday morning about 9 o'clock. That's one of those circumstances where I ran to the sound of the guns. Another one was when the Supreme Court was judging the Obergefell decision, the same-sex marriage decision. I'm the only member of Congress that got a speaker and a podium and a set of cameras and set up on the stage on the steps of the U.S. Supreme Court and made the argument that we need a constitutional decision, and that if the decision is going to be made for same-sex marriage in this country, it's not a court decision. The Constitution does not direct that there be same-sex marriage. It has to be a legislative decision, a political decision. And if you get that sold in the Congress or in the state legislature, I'll honor that and I'll respect that decision, but I won't respect an unconstitutional decision made by the Supreme Court. I made that argument. And let's see, there's at least one other one that's the opening up the monuments, and oh yes, the Adam Schiff's skiff, the secret room down in the basement of the Capitol where he was holding his meetings, planning his strategy to impeach President Trump. There were only 5 of us that went down there to storm that skiff. And once we went down and stormed that skiff and tried to get in, then about 3 days later, there were about 25 that thought, well, that worked out pretty good for those guys, we'll join them. Well, I'm there in that first group, and I'm there in the second group, and if I don't go there, if 3 or 4 others don't go there, Adam Schiff might have gotten away with what he was doing down in that basement. So it isn't just write the legislation, which I do. And by the way, I passed legislation off the floor of the House multiple times and never made the press. One day, I passed 4 pieces of legislation. I packaged them all up for a different paper, sent the press release out. They didn't even bother to print that anything had been done. One of them was sanctuary city legislation, a Sarah Root's bill, a Kate Steinle's bill, and medical malpractice reform. That's pretty big stuff. Doesn't even make the press. And so out of all the members of Congress, there's only one member that has offered more amendments than I have, and amendments are the same as bills in Congress, and there's only one member that has a higher percentage passed. That's Paul Gosar of Arizona. He's the most effective member of Congress, and by that measure, I'm second most effective. He passed me up, and I should have seen it coming.
Thank you, Congressman, for coming in and having discussion on the issues here. And again, the vote is approaching on June 2nd, and Iowans will weigh in at that point. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. SteveKing.com.